Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd just like to start off by saying that if you haven't yet watched the documentary A Murder in the Park, it's well worth a watch. It's by our good friend Sean Reck. It's a 2014 documentary, and it features David Protes, although we don't hear much from him, Anthony Porter, and our story Simon. And the bit that really fascinated me was when the detectives involved in the early part of the case, once Anthony Porter had been released from death row, then there was a lawsuit filed against the detectives that had investigated Anthony Porter and had actually were looking at a lawsuit similar to that which Stephen Avery was pursuing through his lawyers against Manitowoc. And we hear the detectives talking about the sheer horror of having to divulge all of their financial status. And so it was quite interesting hearing the detective talking about that. So I'm not going to say much more about it, but well worth a watch. It's called A Murder in the Park. It features in particular Anthony Porter and our story Simon. Some of you will remember a few years back the wonderful Mr. Kratz doing a series of videos, short videos, and at the end of one of them the screen went very dark, but if you turn the brightness full up you could see an image that some people thought was that of Teresa. It was in fact of Anthony Porter. So anyway, we'll probably get on to Sean Reck and the wonderful attorney of Calumet County, Mr. Kenneth the Rapist Kratz, at a future time. But let's just quickly recap where we left off. I've got the sort of paragraphs here in front of me, and sensibly I've decided to enlarge them slightly so it makes it a bit easier to read. Okay, so we'll just pick it up a couple of paragraphs from where we left off. So Kelly and Glynn decided to withhold filing a suit for damages until the completion of an ongoing investigation into Manitowoc's handling of the Avery case by the Wisconsin Attorney General. Quote, "Our thinking was that the AG would be very likely to find misconduct, which would help the civil suit," explains Kelly. "We also wanted the DOJ investigators to have it all of those witnesses in order to put meat on the bones of the story that we could then use in the civil suit. It turned out that we had a great disappointment with Peg's ultimate conclusions. Former Attorney General Peggy Lautenschlager's 14-page findings concluded that there was, quote, "no basis to bring criminal charges or assert ethics violations against anyone involved in the investigation and prosecution of Steve in '85. The document was released in December of '03, just weeks after Steve was set free. However, the surprising outcome was in fact a blessing in disguise. As part of the discovery for Avery's Steve's suit, Kelly and Glynn got access to all the investigatory reports that formed the basis of Peg's decision. In truth, what happened in that case was that inside the Wisconsin DOJ, Lautenschlager's investigators were in fact strongly in favour of finding misconduct. Why wouldn't they? Says Kelly. But it was the AG, the Attorney General, and one of her deputies. As I say, wonder who could have been one of her deputies at the time, who made the decision not to do that. And we had all of those internal documents. Before Avery's legal team had deposed a single witness. There was an arsenal of ammunition from the AG's office supporting a Section 1983 claim. Meanwhile, Steve's story had entered the national consciousness, and Steve himself had become a statewide symbol of a broken criminal, I hate to use the word justice because you very rarely see that. Oh, I suppose it says it so. Broken criminal justice system in need of repair. Ultimately, Kelly and Glynn deposed almost 40 witnesses on Steve's behalf. Each set of testimony was more damning than the last and supported the allegation that Steve had been the victim of aggravated constitutional violations. Legally speaking, it was a bloodbath. So let's carry on. That's as far as we got last time. I think the depiction of Steve in the series is a positive good, says Kelly. It reveals the underbelly of the criminal justice system. Although this is a spectacular case in itself, these operations and biases and countervailing forces that go on in the criminal system are daily events, and they require us to think twice about what's important in that system. Now, as the discovery period progressed in Steve's civil suit, two moments in particular sent a charge through his attorneys. First, they elicited testimony revealing that Manitowoc County police detectives had begun round-the-clock surveillance of Gregory Allen 2 weeks before the assault on Penny in 1985. However, surveillance of Gregory Allen was temporarily suspended on the day of the assault because police resources were redirected to another case. What's more, Penny continued to receive threatening phone calls after Steve's arrest, which County Sheriff Tom Kosurik dismissed as immaterial. Worst of all, just days after Steve's arrest, a Manitowoc County detective informed Tom Kosurik that Allen was not under surveillance when the attack occurred, and it was likely that the wrong man was in custody. The detective was told to steer clear of matters outside his jurisdiction. Now, just to break off for a wee moment, a good friend of mine, Dave Bogotka, you might have heard of him. He had a bar in Manitowoc, and he recounts the fact that on the day that Penny was attacked on the beach, it was bizarre how so many officers suddenly appeared, and yet they weren't there to help Penny at the time. It does seem very bizarre. We'll obviously have a chat with Dave about the situation in Manitowoc at that time and later on. So hi Dave. I've not forgotten to get you on for another chat about stuff. There was definitely something strange going on, shall we say, on the beach when Penny was attacked. As I say, the fact that they taken police that were surveilling him off to do something else. Anyway, let's move on. A second high point during discovery was equally incriminating. Bernstein Penny had identified Steve as her assailant using an image array of suspects, but deposition testimony confirmed that the Sheriff's Department had used a booking photo of Steve to generate its forensic composite drawing. Jean Couchet, the pencil. The mistake, the mugshot that inspired the drawing by the pencil was taken in January of 1985, and Steve's appearance at that time was dramatically different from how he looked when he was arrested in July. Meanwhile, the department possessed and was aware of a 1983 booking photo of Gregory Allen that looked a lot like Avery's composite drawing, but omitted it from the image array Penny reviewed. Those were the two moments when we knew, to a degree that you rarely know in a civil rights suit, that we had the defendants ice cold, recalls Kelly. I will tell you that in my mind and Steve Glynn's mind, if we had to go to trial, bearing in mind that other things might occur, they might settle without going to trial, the only issue was going to be how much. When Kelly and Glynn filed Avery's lawsuit on October the 24th, 2004, the dollar demand wasn't arbitrary. Using a survey by the Innocence Project of Wrongful Conviction Exoneration Awards, along with other recent data from across the country at the time, Avery's lawyers did their best to extrapolate. The grand total, $18 million in compensatory damages for targeting, personal hostility and obstruction of justice, along with punitive damage of an additional $18 million. The mathematics involved a little alchemy and helped to set precedent, since these were the early days of DNA exoneration cases and associated lawsuits. Kelly explains how the team arrived at $36 million. We looked at the 18 years served of a 32-year term, and we looked at the incredible losses that Stephen had taken. Not only the possible loss of his mind, but the loss of his marriage and the loss of contact with his children. We thought that $1 million a year was reasonable based upon everything we knew. Then we looked at the developing law of punitive damages, and one of the key components was and is some kind of a reasonable ratio between the punitive damages demand and the compensatory damages demand. We decided to make that ratio 1 to 1. At this point, the case was essentially all but over, except for the payout. Everybody knew we were going to win, says Kelly. The defence lawyers knew as well. Our depositions brought out the very aggravated nature of the constitutional violations. In fact, some of the conduct was so egregious that there was the possibility of a federal criminal civil rights investigation. That was the state of affairs. The goings-on behind the scenes in Manitowoc County at the time affirmed Kelly's optimism. Throughout the pre-trial phase, the county looked at every insurer it had a relationship and which among them might qualify as a potential indemnifier, then made a tender of defence to each of them. According to Kelly, Manitowoc was telling its insurers, quote, "We think you're covering us on this. We want you to represent us and indemnify if there's a judgment." Without exception, the insurers replied with a reservation of rights letter. In the simplest terms, they were cautioning the county. Quote, "We'll represent you, but if Steve Avery and his lawyers are able to prove what they say they are going to prove, we're not going to cover you." It was dramatic, recalls Kelly. Steve's lawyers completed a particularly revealing deposition supporting their claim in late October of 2005. A few days later on Halloween, Wisconsin photographer Teresa Holbach disappeared. Her last known destination was the Avery salvage yard to photograph a vehicle for Auto Trader magazine. I think we'll stop share there. I will of course pop the link to that article in the description below, and as I say, it's not a complicated situation. You know, Manitowoc, the Thomas Kasurik, Dennis Vogel, the Sheriff's Department, District Attorney's Office, were facing the most horrendous outcome. And I was thinking about this the other day. You know, somebody like Andy Colburn, who had the misfortune to take the phone call in '95 and then wrote a report about it 8 years later when asked to do so, told to do so. You know, his finding of the key in the bedroom. Can we sort of realise the sort of pressures that the Sheriff's Department were under to secure the conviction of Stephen Avery, just to get him off their back? This was gonna be so horrendous for Manitowoc County. And bizarrely, we hear that in 2006, when Sheriff Herman was going for sheriff, he only had one person competing against him, and that was Andy Colburn, supported of course by his good pal Jim Link. And I've often wondered about that one, particularly as it was Sheriff Herman that, without being asked, said to me, "Oh, I don't hold any grudges against Andy Colburn. You know, I'm not bothered about it. He won the election, and Robert Herman was always good for the odd quote that you weren't expecting." But he's happily retired now. But as I say, it's you can't imagine, can you, what it would be like in the Sheriff's Department in 2003 when Steve was exonerated, and then luckily the Attorney General, Peg, who likes a lager, decided that there was no case to answer, even though the majority of people in the Wisconsin DOJ thought that they should. Glenn Kelly and Steve Glynn, Walt Kelly, I'll get them right in a minute, decided obviously to pursue the action against the Manitowoc County. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, they should have said to Steve, "Look, this is going to get messy. This is going to get very, very messy. We're told it's a bloodbath. Get the hell out of Manitowoc. In fact, get as far away from Wisconsin as you can. Just go somewhere until the case is settled, until it's actually either settled with compensation to you, or it went to court." Of course, maybe you know, a lot of innocent lives could have been spared. Anyway, we'll catch you again soon. Take care. It's I say, it's great being back in the dude's shed in his back garden. We all miss him, of course, tremendously, but he certainly would want everybody to keep going. And I noticed Foul Play, Dr. Silkman, still going strong. Hats off to you, pal. Absolutely fantastic. You know, I'm not quite sure how your Aussie football team's doing, but I'm sure that one of the Adelaide teams will be doing quite well. So anyway, we'll catch you soon, and we'll have a look at some more of the developments in a kind of more of a chronological order. And as I say, unfortunately, we probably will have to get on to the wonderful former District Attorney for Calumet County, and Mr. Wiegert and Mr. Fassbender. Well, as I said, I certainly want to to look at a little bit more about the bizarre case of Brendan. Anyway, we'll catch you soon. Take care. Bye for now.